There was once a large church in a large city. It was a beautiful and well-kept church. The best technology was used for worship and for keeping the building in good shape. The pastors and leaders did a great job to create a compelling vision and to encourage others, so that together they were working to reach out for the success of the ministry and teaching thousands of lives. And then a disaster hits the town. In the course of just a few hours, tens of thousands were homeless. The flooding looked like it would go on for days, and thousands of buildings were destroyed. What to do with this well-kept building that was not flooded? Well, surely less pristine buildings could be used for shelters. All sorts of people would be entering shelters, and that would result in some permanent stains on carpet. Things would get broken. There's a certain smell that comes with hundreds of people living in a space. You would need to find trusted volunteers, a falls program. It would have to be shifted. And besides, people who were flooded out of their homes probably were not potential church members. So what would have you done if you were Joel Osteen, the senior pastor of Lakewood Church in Houston, Texas? What would you have chosen to do? For Osteen and the church, their services are seen by over 7 million viewers per week, 20 million per month, in over 100 countries. The sanctuary would probably not stay pristine. He got criticism as the Osteens avoided opening the Lakewood Church. They did not initially open it as a shelter, and it got worse because there was some false information publicized as to whether the building was really flooded or the parking lot was flooded. And there was a lot of backlash on social media, and there was the missed opportunity to put faith in action. For, as Pastor Steve reported in the Children's Time, other churches were opening their doors. But before I go too far down the critical route, I want to note there really is a part of Joel Osteen in every one of us. The question is, what do you do about that piece? You see, some of us like the way buildings are kept. And sometimes we want things that are well planned to continue in the manner in which they were planned. So what do you do about that piece of Joel Osteen that wanted to continue the ministries he believed were God-inspired to be carried out and not respond to immediate need? Well, this morning's focus is on the way we use our time and what we have. We're not talking about finances. That's a different topic that has its own issues. But we're talking about time and buildings and homes and cars and time. Did I mention time? We each were given the same amount of time today and yesterday and tomorrow. And our scripture gives us the example of Lydia. Lydia is a great model for us. For Lydia, we heard many things in the scripture that Gary read for us this morning. Her reputation and her name comes from selling purple clothes, cloths of purple, which came from an area of the world at that time that was called Lydia. And so Lydia may have been her actual name, or it may have been a reflection of the place where the purple came from. And in order to do the trading of any of the purple goods, Lydia must have had significant money. She's known as one of the business women in the Bible. But for today, it's not her money that gets her recognized. See, this was what was going on. Paul did come to the town of Philippi to preach. And normally that means Paul needed to work part-time in order to afford housing and food. That was part of what happened. He needed to pay his own expenses as a traveling preacher. One of the early gatherings was outside of the town. And that gathering was with Lydia and a number of other women. It was called a place of prayer, which probably meant that it was a group of Jewish women who were meeting. There weren't enough Jewish men to form a quorum to have a formal synagogue. So this was a more informal place. But there was an advantage for the women. Because it was not a formal synagogue, it meant the women were allowed to interact with the preacher-teacher. If it was a formal synagogue, the women would have been relegated to the back. But here is where things happened. As Paul met with this group of women, as they were seeking to have time in prayer, it was Lydia who said, "Stay at my place. Come and stay with me. I'll take care of the housing. You can put all your efforts into preaching. And others certainly need to hear the message you have." And later on, that relationship that was started comes back around. Verse 20 at the end of the reading this morning was when Paul was returning on his trip. And there he stops to see Lydia and her family, those who were living in her household. Oh, and we hear it popping up a number of times about the generosity of the people in the church of Philippi. Keep looking for that at other times you're reading Scripture. It's because of the woman in purple. But Lydia offered her home and not the church building. Now, some of you are sitting there saying, "Oh, it's okay to offer the church building. We've had some formal contracts with the Red Cross over the years. There's been a lot of caring come out of this building." What about the shift from church building to your home? where does that leave you? Would you allow flood victims to stay in your home? I know over the years some of you have taken in people. At one point I was counting that 4 families in this church at one point had extra people living in their homes. Foster children or friends of one of their kids who needed a place to stay, or helping a friend with her children. And it wasn't the wealthy, pristine buildings. It wasn't the fancy, wealthy homes. These were just people opening their homes. People willing to show gratitude about everything they had. Generous living. I believe that calls us to share the best of our accommodations. As Steve Bowers said, give us the best, not just what's secondary. God didn't just preach to us about generosity. Oh, God has shown us, and we are the recipients of God's generosity, the extravagant beauty in this world. From the sequoia trees that I was viewing a few weeks ago, to the Indiana lakes, to the amazing beauty of a green cornfield. God shared all of us, including God's Son. God shared a son. What kind of generosity is that? A child shared with the world. And God is available all times of every day, which is more generosity than I have. Many of us respond to God's generosity and are extremely generous with our time and supplies. If you happen to think you cannot be generous, well, this was a good week to be thinking about that, because maybe some of these ideas will pull a little bit on your heart. For this week in the Goshen News was the annual edition of Angels Among Us Awards. And I find a lot of enjoyment reading these and seeing how so many people give. And these are the ones that were recognized. Here's what some of them do. Consider this, or maybe you have even better ideas to share. One takes special needs children to Swiss Valley to teach them to ski once a week. Another helps her neighbors to stay connected with each other, investing that time. Another calls each member of the church on their birthday. Another has learned magic just to entertain others, especially children at Riley Hospital. Another began doing respite care for a youth with Down syndrome, and now when he's in town, they just hang out and spend time together. Another volunteers at Council on Aging as a money manager. Another volunteers with children at the library. Another serves as an adoptive grandparent to church children. Another allows their home to be used for housing a youth in need and later on at graduation. Another helps with the horses and children at Loveway. Another helps others feel welcomed. Another drives people for medical appointments. And another looks for people who are distraught and extends sympathy and sometimes prayer. What I found fascinating as I read through the biographies, almost every one of them noted involvement in their local church. My guess is they were taught early on to be generous because God has been generous with them. Generosity can be taught. Our video for the offering suggested that it can be passed along from generation to generation. Generosity can be what you see and what becomes that core belief of who you are. One of the recipients summarized it as, if you want to find happiness in yourself, you give yourself away. That was how Lydia lived as she shared the space in her home. Lydia, the woman in purple, and God smiled. And yet, there still is some of that worst part of Joel Osteen in all of us. Wanting to hang on, even when it's the time to be generous. I pray that all of you can look at yourselves and identify the part of Osteen that is in you that doesn't want to care for everyone. Beyond that normal self-care that is needed. I pray that all of you may relate even more to that piece of Lydia in our world. Be generous in all the time and with the possessions that have come along your way. Amen.